Good Shabbos, everyone. I know none of us like someone, is annoyed by someone who has a big ego. Egos are never good to have as a friend and as a family member. An ego is different than having confidence. An ego is thinking that you know everything, that you're always right, and you never need to listen to the advice of anyone, even those closest to you. Someone with an ego who's so big that they overestimate their own abilities. They're a know-it-all. And over the past year, the world has had a perfect example of someone with an inflated ego. Vladimir Putin. We've all seen the destruction now over the last year that he's wreaked upon the innocent people of Ukraine, and even the people of his own country, with his economy in free fall and people leaving Russia. And yet he continues the destruction, the war, with no positive gains for anyone in the murder of thousands of innocents. How could he continue on this rampage? I'm sure there are people who want to tell him what he's doing is wrong. I'm sure his advisors would like to tell him. But they're either afraid that they'll kill him for it, or they know he won't listen anyway. They know his ego is too big. But the reality is, Putin is not alone. We've had tyrants over the centuries who thought they knew it all, that only they could make the right decisions, and they didn't need to listen to the advice of others. In our reading today, we see another tyrant who continues his reign of terror, despite the obvious failures. Pharaoh. We are all familiar with the actions of Pharaoh, and whether it's in the section of the Torah that we're reading this month, or of course during the Passover story. And like me, perhaps you wondered before, how could Pharaoh continue to go on after each single plague? Blood, frogs, lice, the plagues that continue to go on and continue to get worse and worse and worse. And yet Pharaoh does not listen. Pharaoh's convinced that only he knows right, that he has the interests of the Egyptians at heart, and he doesn't need to let the people go. Finally, in our Torah portion today, the people have the courage to say to him, "How long, Pharaoh, will you be a stumbling block to us? Let the people go and worship their God. Don't you know that Egypt is lost?" And even though Egypt had already suffered through 7 plagues, Pharaoh was still not letting them go. And they now beg Pharaoh to relent. They've had enough of the plagues. And at this point, it was clear to everyone in Egypt what would eventually happen. They would only suffer more plagues, and worse plagues, and more suffering to no end. And despite the harmful consequences, Pharaoh keeps indulging in the same destructive behavior. What Pharaoh did to his people, we see now Putin doing to his people in Russia. Now, my friends, it's easy to criticize someone like Pharaoh, other dictators over the ages, those with such big egos that they don't even listen to their advisors, as Pharaoh doesn't listen again to his advisors in our Torah portion today. But I think the question we need to ask on a very different level is, do our egos stop us from listening to those who care most about us? Are there times in our own lives where our egos are too inflated, where we think we know best, that we don't need the counsel, advice, even from those that love us the most? Pharaoh really was no different. To let his people go out of Egypt with all their children and all their belongings made the most sense. If Pharaoh would have only listened to the counsel of his advisors from the beginning. But how often in your life has someone you trusted gave you good advice, but instead of listening, your pride, your ego has already taken over? And like Pharaoh, your heart has already been hardened. You tell yourself, I don't need to listen to anyone else. I know what's best. I always make right decisions. And so you respond to those who love you, don't tell me what to do. We think we know better. We refuse to even listen to those who care about us the most. I remember years ago, my wife Lisa and I had the opportunity to finally move, to get out of our small starter house. Lisa found a house that was on the market and was within our budget. It was an incredible deal, the perfect house for us. But we had to move fast before we lost it. Yet, I didn't want to hear it. I thought I knew what was best. I was the husband. I had to be the one to find the right house and make that big decision. I was being lazy and stubborn all at the same time. It was all about my pride. Fortunately, Lisa finally got through to me, and before someone else grabbed that house, we made the move. And I was reminded then, as I've learned over the years, that my wife is often right, that I should have just listened to her in the first place. Isn't that normally the case for us husbands? Our spouses speak to us, they tell us, we know what they're saying is the truth, but we don't want to listen. Our egos take over again and again. We have to be the ones to make the decisions. We're so great, we don't need anyone else's advice. But isn't that why we get married in the first place? Later this evening, I'll have the blessing of standing under the chuppah with the bride and groom. And I often remind new couples that marriage, our tradition reminds us that marriage is designed to allow us to spend our lives with someone who can get through to us. That's why we get married in the first place. We want to marry someone that we trust. Not only that we love, but we trust. Because we trust their wisdom. We trust their counsel. We know that we are marrying someone who can help us make better decisions by offering the guidance that all of us need. All of us at times in our lives feel so powerful, so wise, so brilliant. We're so incredible in our careers. Why would we need to listen to anyone? And we mistakenly think we can go through life without the counsel of someone else. But the blessing of being married is that we get to live day in and day out with someone who can get through to us. They may not always be right. Sometimes we are. But can we at least listen? And as we go through life, it can be even worse when it comes to our parents. I love what Mark Twain, the great American author, said over a century ago. Twain said once, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the odd man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years." Yes, there soon comes an age when we may not want to admit it, but our mother or our father actually know a thing or two. They've lived longer lives than we have. They've been around the block a few times. And yet, as we get older, we want to be the ones choosing our own destinies. We don't need their advice anymore. We're old now. We're mothers or fathers ourselves. And we mistakenly believe we don't need the counsel of our parents at all. It's not to say that we have to follow their advice word for word, but can we at least be open to listening to them? Because not only can we be surprised or often appreciate the advice we'll get, most importantly, I would argue, for those of us who are blessed to have parents with us and children at the same time, by listening to our parents, we set a great example, a dugma, for our children. Because yes, one day we'll want our children to listen to us as well. But if they see us constantly dismissing our parents, never seeking their advice or counsel, never listening to them, never speaking to them about the big decisions, then they'll learn and ask, why do I need to listen to my mother or father? And there's the great challenge. As our children become young adults, can they not only see us listen to our parents from time to time, can we learn to pull back when they don't want to hear from us? Can we walk the line? Not letting our egos be so big that we automatically expect our children to not only listen to us, but always follow our advice, word from word. And it's not easy. Now, as I have 2 kids in college and one about to graduate high school, I've realized what the biggest challenge for me is. It's that I'm no longer there on a daily basis to help with their decisions. And there are times my ego calls out to me. I say to myself inside, my ego calling out, how could my children not want my advice all the time? I'm the best father that ever lived. But when my ego calls out, it's time to remember that I'm clearly not the best father that ever lived. And most importantly, it's time to remember how I felt when I was 18, 19, and 20 years old. When making decisions, often my parents were the last people I would consult. It's not that I never reached out. I still sought their advice when making the big decisions. But I was getting older. It was time to chart my own course and trust that I was old enough to make those decisions. And in many ways, my own children are now doing the same. Yes, there are times they do reach out, and I have to remember it's often not through a phone conversation, but it's through a text. But with those reaching out, and when they reach out for those big decisions, they're still wanting my advice. They don't always follow my lead. They often go their own way. And that's how I know I did okay as a parent. And most importantly, in the long run, they will be fine. My friends, as we go through life's journey, can we keep our egos in check, learning from the examples we see on the world stage and in our Torah, learning to hear those who love us the most, reminding ourselves that there are those who love us so much, they only seek to speak to us, give us their counsel. They only seek to better our lives. And by doing so, we set an example for those who come after us. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.